welcome. You know, we're going to get through this crisis. And one day that we will look on the other side of this crisis and wish we knew then what we know now. Anytime something like this happens, finger pointing comes out. Now, I get it. It is an election year, and so one party is trying to make themselves a little bit better, a little bit more honest, a little bit more knowledgeable, making the right decisions, the tough decisions, more than the other candidates. But it's tragic when something like this happens and everybody starts blaming someone else instead of worrying about the people that are actually affected by the crisis. Just like in Pearl Harbor, there was people saying all this bad intelligence and somebody should have made decisions. That was 70 plus years ago, or like 9/11. Something in certainly my lifetime. Not everyone watching today, but in my lifetime. People were saying, look at President Bush. He was reading books to children. He should have been focused on the country. Or we had intelligence that they were going to do this, and we did nothing. One article I read about this week, in fact, I'll just read the article. It was from Bloomberg News and Los Angeles Times. The national shortage of N95 respirator masks can be traced back to 2009 after the H1N1 swine flu pandemic, when President Obama, his administration, was advised to replenish a national stockpile, but did not. There it is. It's Obama's fault. We all knew it. It's Obama's fault. Blame Obama. Well, there's another article that you read, and I saw this in several newspapers as well. But there was another article that said, with 1 year into his administration, President Trump dismantled his pandemic task force. Ha! Ha! Clearly, it's President Trump's fault. You see, hindsight is 20/20. It will always be 20/20. But foresight? Not so much. I would imagine that many people that have this awful virus right now are probably thinking, man, I wish I wouldn't have been in that crowded room of people. Or man, I wish I would have wore gloves or washed my hands more or mask or whatever it was. You know what? I have seen some people say, I took every precaution. I don't even know how this happened. But they still have the virus. You see, hindsight's 20/20. There was a headline I read the other day, and it says this. Well, let me just read the article, or the headline. Washington Choir rehearsal linked to coronavirus outbreak after dozens of members fall ill. 2 die. If that's all you read was that article, you'd say, well, those stupid Christians getting together when people are telling them not to, it's their fault. But when you read the article, it was right at the beginning of this crisis when this happened. They made it voluntary for their 120 choir members, 220, made it voluntary. Hey, don't come. Don't come if you're worried about it. It's just a voluntary practice. Then they told their elderly choir members, you stay home as well. We heard this thing's hitting people. You stay home as well. They had 60 people show up of their 120. But out of those 60 people that showed up, 43 have the virus. It's crazy what's going on right now. And remember, it is easy to look back and say, well, they should have done something different. But isn't it much harder for us to look forward? Paul Miller wrote in the Dispatch that the National Intelligence Council had intelligence back in 2004 of this pandemic. Here's what he says in his article. Some experts believe it's only a matter of time before a new pandemic appears. This is in 2004. Such as 1918 and 1919 influenza virus that killed an estimated 20 million people worldwide, wrote the National Intelligence Council, warning that a pandemic would put a halt to global travel, trade during an extended period of time, prompting governments to expend enormous resources on overwhelmed healthcare sectors. That was a report by the National Intelligence Council in 2005. And when we look about some of those, that their job is to know about this. Now, okay, if you think I'm just bashing these, I'm not. I'm going to have a point, all right? I'm going to get there, but you got to hang with me just for a few minutes. But when you look at these agencies, these three-letter agencies that their job is to know about this, like the WHO, the World Health Organization, not the band. That's something different. The CDC, the NIH. John Solomon wrote an article recently in a website called Just the News. He wrote this article that said over 87% of the money spent on medical studies is wasted on useless projects. Then he goes down to name a few of the projects. Listen to these. There was a study on drunk monkeys. Drunk monkeys. There was a large amount of money spent on a hip hop campaign to encourage kids to not eat so much French fries and eat fruit a little bit. All right? There was another study on whether text messaging tailgating college students would cause them to drink less alcohol after the football game. There was a study to determine if 21 to 30-year-olds lose more money gambling when they're drunk. There was also a study, a flight simulator built to simulate drunk piloting. That's great, isn't it? And there was just a few weeks ago, there's a report that came out. In fact, there was a mirror report by the same agency just a year ago. But they came out literally just a few weeks ago. Get this. Walking more makes you healthier. Huh. I would imagine if we knew then what we know now, certainly lives could have been saved. But here's the point. Maybe we should have known, but we only saw what we wanted to see. It's hard to absorb any information you're reading out there. It's hard to absorb without bringing your own bias to the table. Let me give you an example. A few minutes ago, I mentioned two presidents. I mentioned the decision that President Obama made in the first year of his first year as presidency. Then I mentioned our most recent president, President Trump, the decision he made within the first year of his presidency. Both of them made decisions that now look like not so great decisions. But according to your bias, according to what you already think of these two gentlemen, one's behavior is a lot more egregious than the other. And this is what we do. You've already made an excuse for your guy. Well, how could he have known that something like this happened? Monday morning quarterbacking, right? 2020 hindsight. Let's transition to what this day is all about. This day we call Palm Sunday on the Christian calendar. And let me read the text. I'm going to be reading Mark's version of the text, but this particular event is one of the things that happens in all four of the Gospels. Mark chapter 11, starting with verse 1. Now, when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and Bethany, at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied, on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord has need of it, and will send it back here immediately.'" And they went away and found a colt and tied it to a door outside in the street. And they untied it. And some of those standing there said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" And they told them what Jesus had said, and they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their cloaks on the road. Others spread leafy branches that they had cut from the fields. And those who went before and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Blessed is he in the highest." In fact, the day we call Palm Sunday is really a little weird itself. Because the focus seems to kind of be on the palms and not the reason for the palms itself. The fact that there was palms there at all, even involved, was really kind of random. Well, some people think it was random. Some people think it had something to do with the Maccabean revolt, and that was a symbol of the revolt a few hundred years later. I'm not exactly sure. But here's what the deal is, or here's what we're getting at. It's hard to absorb any information or any of this without bringing our bias to the table. And the same goes for the people there today. Palm Sunday, as I was very honored and very fortunate to grow up in a household where we were made to go to church. Now, there was times I enjoyed it, but there was times when I got a little older, I tried to talk my way out of it, and that just wasn't the way it was going to be. My mom said, no, you're going. She listened to my argument, but, I had to go anyway. But nonetheless, I probably should cut all that out. I had to go to church. And so when I was a little kid on Palm Sunday, somebody had a great idea. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a guy, and we're going to have him dress up like Jesus, which is pretty much the blue sash and the white robe. And we're going to have him walk down the aisle. And we're going to hand all the kids palms to wave. What could possibly go wrong, right? So there we are lined up. And it was a pretty large church. And I bet you, I'm thinking there's probably 30 to 40 kids lined up. And we all were waving. And I can remember all lined up the center aisle. And we're all ready for white Jesus to come down the aisle. And here he comes. Waving and doing the princess wave, walking down the aisle. And he got about just, 5 or 10 feet in, and some kid had the idea, let's smack Jesus in the face. Well, now, you got to understand something. It really wasn't Jesus. It was Dave. And they probably picked Dave because he was the only white guy in the church with the beard, right? And so one kid's packing the face, and he's kind of, getting like, hey, because he's still got to put the knee on the crowd. And then pretty soon every other kid starts beating Jesus with their palms, and this became a little bit of a fun. Kind of like a riot, all right? And then whenever, white Jesus or Dave, whatever you want to call him, went by us, then we started slapping each other. And kind of a little bit of, chaos ensued. And they took the palms away from us, and I don't think we ever did that again. That was Palm Sunday growing up. But the first Palm Sunday was a little different. Understand something, that the Jews were under Roman occupation. The Jews were under Roman occupation. And everywhere they went, the Jewish people were reminded. Every time they saw a Roman garrison, every time they saw Roman guards posted, the Jews were reminded they were not free. And now this was Passover week. Maybe akin to their 4th of July. It was akin to their Independence Day. Because their Independence Day was when God delivered the people who were enslaved, their first slave masters, the Egyptians, when God delivered Israel from their hands. They had been enslaved for 400 years. And God said, on the night that they were going to be free, to prepare this meal, and that this meal should be forever practiced. And it wasn't just a one-night meal, one-off. It was a week-long celebration. And all of Israel had come to Jerusalem for that day. So you can bet Rome was on high alert. Because there was one thing that Israel was focused on, and one thing it was all about, was freedom. Just like our Independence Day. So Jesus tells his disciples to go and borrow a colt, a foal of a donkey. Matthew writes in his version of the gospel that Jesus chose this to fulfill the words of the prophet Zechariah, who wrote hundreds of years earlier, Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he. Humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I couldn't find anywhere in any of the Gospels that people were actually waving palms. But they did do one thing. They did lay them down. Some took the branches, and some Gospels say they took leafy branches. They took them and they laid them on the road. Others took their cloaks to... This was done also a few hundred years before with the King Jehu when he became king. Was this terrible king of Israel. But to honor him, they laid the cloaks for him to cross over with the animal that he was riding on. But the Bible does say that they laid their cloaks, laid them down on the road. And then they chanted something. It wasn't random. They said Hosanna. And the word literally, Hosanna, is save us. It means save us. But then who did they refer Jesus as? Son of David. That chant wasn't random. They had a purpose. Because who was David? The greatest king Israel ever had. And the the greatest military leader Israel ever had. Do you think that Rome didn't know that? Of course they did. Of course they knew that. So now they were already on alert. Now you knew they went from regular alert to condition red. And you see, this is where biases come in. Like me today, the crowd saw what they wanted to see. They saw exact Jesus, how they wanted to see him. They wanted a liberator from Rome, and that's who they saw that day. Even though Jesus had been talking for 3 years, Jesus had been telling exactly what his kingdom was about. That his kingdom wasn't about just of this world. That his kingdom was something much greater. That his purpose wasn't to just free Israel, but to free all mankind. Even though this was Jesus' focus, they still brought their own bias to the table. And they made Jesus who they wanted to be. You see, they wanted Jesus to fit their narrative. They wanted Jesus to fit their predetermined story. And when they didn't, possibly the same crowd that chanted, Hosanna, Son of David, just a few days later, chanted, Crucify Him. You see, if they really understood who Jesus was, they would have shouted, Hosanna, save us. But not from Rome. Save us from our sins. You see, if they knew then what we know now, they wouldn't have only laid palm branches on the road and maybe a few of the more dedicated their cloaks, but they would have laid their lives down for him. If they only knew then what we know now. You know, as I mentioned, undoubtedly we'll look back at this time in our history and we'll be critical. We already are, because that's what we do. We're humans. We like being critical of others. I guess it makes us feel a little bit better about ourselves. But we'll look back and our leaders will be judged by the decisions they make. Some good, some bad. We can be critical of the crowd because they didn't have all the information. You see, I know what it's like to lead and not have all the right information. I do know what it's like. I've been honored to be in ministry many years, and sometimes I have to make difficult decisions without all the information. And so I'm a little bit more grace-giving when it comes to other leaders, knowing that they did not have all the information and they made the best they could. And when I look back at this crowd, you have to understand something. They wanted a king. So they saw what they wanted to see. So it's easy for us to be critical. So how quickly they changed from Hosanna to Crucify Him. Because they didn't know they didn't come to save Israel. And we do. But here's the point, as I'm kind of stuttering around with it, is what are you doing with this information? What are you doing with it? You know, for those that believe in Jesus, that those that understand that it was on this day that Jesus pronounced that he was the coming king. He was the king of our lives. What are you doing with this information? Again, if you believe, I hope you are, by your words, by your actions, by how you're loving and serving your neighbor, I hope you're proclaiming the gospel that way. But for those of you who are yet to believe, I hope today's your day. I hope today is the day that you make the decision that you're going to follow Christ. That you're going to say, Lord, I'm a sinner. Please save me by your grace. Please fill me with your Holy Spirit that I'll follow you all the days of my life. And that decision, when you do that in faith, that's about it. But that's that decision to follow him all your days that makes all the difference. So again, just as we'll look back on the decisions made in the real time of this crisis, again, some good, some bad, we'll look back one day from eternity. You have to understand something. We're all eternal beings. We were all created for eternity. And we'll look back from eternity one day at the decisions that we're making today. You see, the decision that you're making right now will determine your outcome. Jesus made a decision when they created the world, creation. Even before that moment, he knew he was going to have to die for all mankind. I know that blows some people's minds. that's hard to wrap around. Then why did he do it? Because that's how much he loves his creation. Because he knew he was going to have to die. And he knew he'd have to do. And yet he still made that decision. To come, to live fully as a man, to die for us as our eternal sacrifice, and to rise again. That's really what this day is about. You know, 3.7 million, I didn't say the number before, but $3.7 million seems like a lot of money to spend studying drunk monkeys. 3.54 million seems like a whole lot of money to tell a chubby kid to put down the fries and pick up a piece of fruit. And yes, that's going to get me in trouble. I mean, what foolish decisions. But again, we have all the information now looking back. You see, those weren't the worst decisions ever made. The worst decisions ever made are probably the ones that aren't made. It's the one that you knowing about what Christ did, you believe in, and I got to think there's something, because there's no way you'd have made it this far in the video. Because if you didn't believe it all, you'd have checked out. I mean, I am not entertaining at all, right? But the worst decision could be made to know everything you know about Christ, to know everything, and still choose not to follow him. Or maybe you chose to follow him, but that's it. You really haven't done anything with that. You haven't been praying for your neighbors. You haven't been serving those in need. Whatever it is. For both of you, the believer and the non-believer, today is your day. Today is your day to do eternal things. Let me pray with you. Lord, I pray. I pray for my friends here, and I pray that you'd help them. Lord, I pray that those that don't know you, may your Holy Spirit draw them to you right now, and may they decide to follow you all the days of their life. For those that do, Lord, light a fire underneath us. Lord, light a fire underneath us that will get about your kingdom, because the days are short. Help us not be so caught up and so isolated in our houses that we don't check in on our neighbors, that we don't do acts of love in your name, that we don't pray for them, that we don't look for opportunities to proclaim the gospel. So be with us, Lord, and be with your church.